Good morning. My name is Greg Krasovsky. I'm an American attorney of Russian and Ukrainian descent, and today's video is about the emergency legal services that my law office and attorneys that I work with are trying to provide to Americans and their families who are in harm's way in countries like Ukraine, and now based on the State Department warning, also in neighboring country of Belarus. Today's February 16th, and the good news is no Russian invasion has taken place. War has not started, has not been started by either side, and we don't have loss of life, more importantly, civilian life, innocent civilian life. But nevertheless, we have to pay attention and heed warnings of the State Department, the executive branch, including the White House and the President's office, America's intelligence community, including Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, and other members of the intelligence community, as well as the Office of the National Security Advisor, all of whom have asked and warned Americans to leave these countries, namely Ukraine and Belarus, to avoid ending up in an active war zone, or a zone of civil strife and civil war. This is a lot worse than living next door to a protest that transitions to a riot with vandalism and looting. Here you can quickly become collateral damage because bullets don't have names on them, and especially neither do artillery shells, rockets, or shrapnel, or bombs. So if any of you remember the footage that we've seen over the last 20 years, 30 years, from places like Iraq, from places like Syria, Libya, the former Yugoslavia, even places in the former Soviet Union, hotspots of ethnic strife, of civil war, such as, if we go back to the fall of the Soviet Union, the expulsion, beatings, detentions, kidnappings of Armenians in Azerbaijan, Baku, Azerbaijan, something most people have forgotten about, or the war in Abkhazia, which was a region of Georgia when Georgia was a Soviet republic. And you saw terrible war crimes and crimes against humanity committed against the civilian population and those who were there, who may not even been part of the ethnic conflict between Georgians and Abkhazians, but people of other ethnicities, Black Sea Greeks, Russians who lived in Abkhazia, who ended up being victims, being beaten, killed, robbed of their property, women raped, or just simply becoming victims of fire, stray bullets, bombs and shells and everything else that I mentioned. Other places like South Ossetia in Georgia, or the Transnistria region in Moldavia, where once ethnic strife starts between neighboring local populations, whether it's Ossetians and Georgians, whether it's Moldavians and Russians and Ukrainians in the Transnistria, or other places, you always have the danger of being hurt if you're there, regardless of your passport. In those places, no one is looking at your passport, especially weapons of war. They're not going to examine your citizenship or where you have permanent residence. So it's extremely important to heed those warnings and leave, especially once your country is telling you, which is what America has told us as American citizens, we're not going to be able to safely evacuate you if need be. We've seen this happen recently in America's exit, pretty chaotic exit from Afghanistan. You don't want to be like the Americans, the American citizens, the lawful permanent residents in Afghanistan who were left behind, who were stuck, who were not able to get to the airport, and then had to live in fear that the Taliban would find out about them, that their neighbors would give them up, snitch on them, and they would be kidnapped, beaten, tortured, and held possibly as hostages. This is not a situation that you want to put in either yourself, your family, or your relatives. Obviously, for American citizens or people who already have a green card, who are lawful permanent residents, to get out of a war zone and get back to the U.S., it's not that complicated from an immigration law point of view. You always have the right to come back to your home country, to America, to the homeland. But if you have relatives or family members, stepchildren, adopted children, in-laws, who have not yet obtained U.S. tourist visas, immigrant visas, or travel documents, then you need to seek legal assistance right away. Obviously, contact your local embassy, let them know who you are, or contact the State Department of Washington, let them know who you are. But to make sure that you can properly apply for expedited processing. For instance, if there isn't enough time to give your loved ones a tourist visa, or a tourist visa is not appropriate because they're considered to have migratory intent of permanently relocating to the U.S., which the U.S. immigration law, right, already has the presumption of migratory intent for those who apply for tourist visas, B1, B2 visas to the U.S. If you can't get that tourist visa and you don't have the time to go through all the steps that are necessary for an immigrant visa to be issued, and this depends on the priority level, the closeness of the relative involved. Do they have to wait until an immigrant visa becomes available? Obviously, that's not applicable to your children, minor children, or to immediate relatives like parents. But brothers, sisters, or people that American lawful permanent residents apply for immigration benefits for, the wait can be for 5, 6 years. You're not going to have time to do that. Plus, even once a petition for an alien relative is approved, it has to be processed by the National Visa Center. So the National Visa Center can gather all the documents that they require that you need to upload. So you can fill out the online, fairly extensive online DS-260 application, process all that, and then submit your documents to the local embassy for what's called consular processing. For those of you who've ever dealt with the National Visa Center will realize that sometimes that process can take months. If there are any discrepancies or issues with the documentation information that you've submitted, it may take you 3 or 4 months to resolve it, because that's how long it takes them just to resolve a public inquiry, and or for you to get through on the phone, which is a rarity. But then once you move on to consular processing at the local embassy, if the local embassy is functioning, and we already have a situation where the American embassy in Ukraine and Kiev has been shut down, personnel evacuated, records destroyed, equipment being destroyed. The embassy has temporarily relocated to Lviv, a former Polish Lemberg, a town about 80 kilometers, or I guess about 50 some miles from the Polish border. We have American troops on Poland close to the Ukrainian border, which, if necessary, could provide protection, I'm hoping, to American diplomats or American citizens if they need to shelter or find refuge in Lviv. Lviv could potentially become a shelter city, but that's a separate issue. What we are talking about is consular processing. Consular processing is not really available in Lviv, given the reduced diplomatic staffing that's there. So you would have to apply to other neighboring countries, and those embassies are also going to become overwhelmed with the additional applications. They already have their own waiting lists. So often the only immediate and available rapid solution, if your relatives do not have the ability to simply move to a neighboring safe country until things are processed, or they don't have the means, because temporarily staying in another country can get expensive. Hotels aren't cheap. Neither is renting an apartment on a weekly or a monthly basis without a year-long lease. If you can get a year-long lease, and if the local immigration legislation permits you to stay that long while things are processed for you. So then the only solution to get to the U.S. quickly would be to obtain a travel document, which can be granted for humanitarian reasons. And I think today we have sufficient humanitarian reasons for the loved ones of American citizens, their family members in Ukraine or now in Belarus, to be granted travel documents. Well, this is my opinion as an attorney who also specializes in U.S. immigration law. But the final word is with the agencies that would grant you this travel document. Applications can be made to U.S. Citizen Immigration Services, USCIS, which is a part of DHS, and Customs and Border Patrol, the federal agency that has the ultimate say of whether you get admitted to the U.S. at the border, whether it's an airport or a seaport or another border crossing. Those are the people who will make the decision. So you can apply for a travel document to USCIS, hopefully with an attorney's assistance, to get expedited processing. One thing many people don't know about is that you can also request the State Department and its member U.S. embassies to petition USCIS or Customs and Border Patrol to issue a travel document on an emergency basis for humanitarian reasons. But remember, anytime you're dealing with U.S. government agencies or institutions, you're always dealing with legal formalities and certain bureaucratic constraints and considerations. As we know, civil workers or government workers often do not want to do extra work or are not in a position to do extra work, especially if they're not granted overtime or overtime is not approved, or they're simply overextended in the amount of cases they have to handle. So this is another reason why you really should seek the assistance of a competent and experienced attorney in immigration law to help you get these travel documents on an emergency basis if necessary. Obviously, there are other issues that come along with fleeing a country that go along with it, including property issues. What do you do if you rented an apartment in Ukraine or Belarus? How do you break your lease without getting sued, without losing your security deposit, without having the property that you've left in the apartment or house temporarily stolen, right, or converted, or embezzled, which is basically conversion by someone who's been entrusted with property. Conversion by fiduciary is embezzlement. That most lay people understand. What do you do if you have contractual obligations? Let's say you're doing business in Ukraine or Belarus, and you have contracts with local businesses under which you have contractual obligations to deliver services or deliver goods. How do you make sure that the other side accepts this force majeure? And remember, just because the U.S. government has told you to evacuate doesn't mean that this will be considered and approved of force majeure under local law, if necessarily in the local court, right, or a local arbitration tribunal. Because if the local government has not declared an emergency, then you may not have a force majeure. Recommendations of your home government may not be a force majeure. And this especially affects loved ones who are not American citizens or lawful permanent residents. You also have employment contractual obligations. If you have to leave quickly and you're owed salary, compensation, bonuses, maybe some stock options, what do you do to protect your rights? To make sure that your job is there waiting for you when you're able to return? Or if you're not able to return, what do you do to make sure that you're compensated? These issues can also affect you as an employer, starting from hiring local nannies or house aides, and you have to leave immediately, and these people are going to lose their job security. They may end up suing you, or you may need to take them with you. Can you get visas for them? quickly enough so at least they can follow you sooner or later? Or what do you do to settle up to make sure you're not sued and then potentially prohibited from coming back to Ukraine or Belarus from a legal point of view because you're facing judgments or other worse things? So these are issues that need to be considered. Now, you may also have property issues, selling an apartment, selling a business, exercising your rights as an investor, as a stockholder. What if you owe money to a local bank because you had a credit card or a credit line? Lots of issues that need to be addressed and can be quickly and competently addressed with the assistance of an attorney, along with medical requirements, requirements for travel, vaccinations, including COVID-19 vaccines, and other vaccines that you need to get to make sure you can be, or your loved ones, quickly admitted to the U.S. Because we also have our medical requirements, especially for people, not as much for people who are visitors on B1, B2 visas. Those are only mandated right now. They have COVID-19 vaccines, obviously negative PCR tests showing that they're not infected or suffering from COVID-19 in an active phase while they board the plane or arrive in the U.S. But if you are planning to come to the U.S. on an immigrant visa, and maybe at the later stage of processing, then that also needs to be addressed as well. So, folks, let's just be serious, let's be cautious. If you have to leave Ukraine or Belarus, or if your loved ones who are not American citizens, not lawful permanent residents, and don't have current valid visas or travel documents to enter the U.S., seek the advice of an attorney, seek the help and assistance of your local embassy or other U.S. embassies or the State Department in D.C., and get out of harm's way and address all the necessary legal issues. But first and foremost, it's your safety that needs to be addressed. Everything else can be dealt with. Remember the saying, if the solution to a problem only requires the expenditure of money, then it's not really a problem. It's just a business expense. It's a cost of living expense. So don't make these business or cost of living expenses endanger your life and safety and health, or those of your loved ones. We'll be glad to help you out. I really wish everyone the best of luck in this situation. Hopefully no harm will come to any of us, and we'll be glad to help you out. Just reach out to us. Thank you.